So after our last marathon, I got to thinking about all of the dozens of other YA book adaptations that came out in the wake of successful franchises like Harry Potter and Twilight. But what I always found more interesting were the franchises that never took off, these adaptations that just fizzled out immediately, despite having a lot of promise, or at least a lot of potential. So I decided that a good sequel to looking at one of the most popular and successful YA franchises of all time would be looking at the franchises that never were, at all these movies that just failed right out of the gate. There were so many to choose from, but the ones I have the most connection to and the ones I was most curious to revisit were Eragon, The Golden Compass, The Mortal Instrument City of Bones, Vampire Academy, and Divergent. And of course, I couldn't do it alone. I had to get the band back together.
I think I've seen all of the movies today prior to this, other than Vampire High School. Vampire Academy.
Last time I was the one who's seen the movies the most, and this time I'm the one who's seen the least of them, and I don't like being on this side of it. I think I'm gonna be surprised, maybe disgusted.
The whole shtick is like none of them got sequels, so my expectations are not high.
I'm most excited for Vampire Academy. Vampire High School, if you will.
And all day, we will be experiencing these movies in the comfort of our wonderful custom Team Mike t-shirts made by our very own Matilda. These are not available for sale. They're just for us. They're just for us. So sit back, relax, and join me and my friends on a journey through some of young adult fiction's most popular failures. And what better place to start than with the movie that first made me think, oh, that kind of sucked. All right, strong start. This is like the template for the most generic possible fantasy movie. The main thing is it's just Star Wars. They lean into the Star Wars stuff so much in this movie that it's like they're trying to point out how much of a ripoff it is.
The Varden need a rider if they are to defeat Durza and the king.
So Eragon is the story of Eragon, a young boy who finds a dragon egg, and it turns out he's part of a mystical order of something. It's Jedi with dragons. It's all Star Wars. It's all just Star Wars. He even gets a magical glowing red sword.
So I really liked this movie as a kid. In my defense, I was young and dragons were cool and sword fighting was cool and magic was cool.
From what I remember of the books, the actual interesting and original ideas don't really show up until book 2, and then it kind of goes off in its own direction. But this is very, very much the hero's journey with no alterations.
Also, I think it's very funny that Eragon acted so shocked at every turn that he was the dragon rider when his name is Dragon with an E.
Hey, come on, boys, that's enough.
My favorite part was when the cousin left for war, because then I could, understand who the main character was at that point without having to think about it. There's that weird uncanny valley of like, is this the protagonist or is this just, the guy that looks strikingly similar?
I suffer without my stone. Do not prolong my suffering.
I truly don't believe that anyone thought this would be anything more than a way to make money, because there is just so little effort on display in every regard. The final battle looks so cheap and so lazy, and at the beginning in the montage, there's a scene where Jaimin Hunsu gets stabbed in the shoulder and falls to the ground, and then in the final battle, you see one shot of him where he has the shoulder wound. So they didn't even bother to film another battle sequence. They just used one shot they didn't want to use later. That's the kind of movie you're dealing with, ultimately. And speaking of shots that changed my life, there's one shot of Eragon when he's in his full armor, and they reveal, and it's like his big moment where he's finally a hero. And it cuts to Eragon looking at his reflection. Did they have no other takes?
I barely even recognize myself.
I like how many people had the same name as Game of Thrones characters. We had Arya spelled the same way. We had Bronn, Was it Braun or Brom?
Brom in this, but close enough.
I never knew where they were. There's one time when he just shows up and he's in a barn and he looks and there's a book on dragons. And he's like, whoa. And then Jeremy Irons walks in and we realize it's like his house, but there was nothing to tell us it was his house.
Did you hear me? Get out.
Just definitely not a Dragon Rider's house that we're in right now.
Oh my god. This one guy who knows everything about dragons, including like niche stuff about who killed all the dragons and how he did it and how dragons work and what it's like to be a dragon rider. And he always wears a glove on the hand that dragon riders have a symbol on. And he keeps like whenever dragons come up, he like looks into the middle distance and looks really sad and talks about how sometimes dragons die and leave their riders all alone. And Eragon's like, tight, okay.
I thought we agreed not to lie to one another.
The guy they got to play Eragon has zero presence. He looks vaguely concerned the whole time, and that's the one emotion you get from your protagonist. And considering that nothing interesting happens to him the whole time, I don't blame him. I like that his catchphrase sounds like Bazinga.
I was impressed by some of the sets and some of the set design. Specifically that bridge that they built. Good job, whoever built that bridge and blew it up with the Bazinga. You know, the famous Bazinga bridge that got blown up.
If the book was anything like this movie, anything like it, I can only assume the book is also garbage. This was far worse than I remember. If you're even curious about this movie, like, oh, maybe I'll watch Eric. Don't watch it. You will gain nothing.
I remember that last scene where John Malkovich like cuts his like cloth. There's like a bigger, cooler dragon that pops out. I was expecting the sequel. Like I was anticipating the sequel. Yep, now I understand why there wasn't a sequel.
Where are our lives if there is no dream?
As this movie started, I was thinking, it's not that bad, and I thought maybe it was a little unfair to be slotted in with the rest of these YA failures, as it has been reputation-wise, but then the rest of the movie happened, and it turns out, good call. So The Golden Compass is the story of Lyra, a young girl who goes on this giant adventure across a giant fantasy world, and that's pretty much all that happens. It's just kind of Lyra doing stuff. There's a story there, but it's not really that important.
My biggest gripe with this movie is that Lyra just sort of gets everything handed to her. Literally, she gets handed the golden compass. Nicole Kidman is just like, I'm gonna take you to the north where you want to be. And then when that doesn't work out, the Gyptiums, they're like, yeah, we've been looking after you this whole time from the shadows. Like, nothing bad was ever going to happen to you. Don't worry about that. Yorick likes her, tells her his life story after talking to her for like 5 minutes. I don't know. Lyra's supposed to be this cool character who's like just a naturally born like manipulator, and I feel like she's supposed to get out of situations with like her wit and like using the compass. I don't know, she just sort of coasted through her entire adventure.
Lyra isn't a particularly interesting protagonist. She just kind of complains about things.
Do you think Lyra like changed over the course of the movie? Did she develop at all?
No one really develops in this. Daniel Craig just disappears like halfway through.
Also, Daniel Craig should have been in more of it. At the start, I was like, Daniel Craig looks really hot in this movie. Like, I'm kind of into this weird professor thing he's got going on. He seems to be happy to be here, which I think the other Daniel Craig movies I'd watched the most of were the James Bond ones where he doesn't look happy.
Well, the movie ends very differently from the book. The book's ending is much darker and actually does bring back Daniel Craig's character at the end, and you're waiting throughout the movie like, oh, when's Daniel Craig going to come back? When's he going to factor into all this? Like, is he going to be at the facility? Is he a part of all this? And he just never shows up.
You don't let anybody tell you what to do.
Yes, and look at the welcome I got.
I really like kids. I don't hate kids often. I wish Lyra would rot. I hate Lyra so much. When the kid said her parents abandoned her because no one wanted her, I know that didn't end up being true. I wish it was. If I was Nicole Kidman, I would have left her on purpose. I wouldn't have needed society telling me being a single mother was bad. I would have been like, peace out, this baby has a really rancid vibe. I'm gonna go girl boss it up in Antarctica.
I heard that bears live to hunt and to fight. Why are you wasting your time here? Drinking whiskey.
She was so mad whenever anyone did anything. And it's like, okay, you're a 9-year-old orphan. These standards you're holding aren't realistic at a certain point. And she's getting everyone to work for her. And with the compass thing, whenever she I know that it was like a gift and she was like reading the compass and it was useful and it was the whole point of the story. But every time she brought out the compass and was like, oh, I'm going to ask this question, I'll get the answer. I was like, shut the up, Lyra. I don't want to hear what you think this compass says. Just guess. I don't know. I didn't like her.
It does very much feel like an adaptation of a book that has much more going on in it, because every other scene we're introduced to new concepts and terms and lore, and it's just fantasy term after fantasy term, and none of it really means anything, because none of it has anything to do with the story. It's just window dressing for this very generic adventure. The most fun aspect of movies like this is when they're just really silly and stupid, and this one takes itself seriously enough that it never really leans into that direction. So it just kind of goes on and on and on and just keeps introducing new stuff. And in the wrong hands, with the overabundance of exposition and lore, this is what Harry Potter could have been. It could have been this bad and dull and just nothing.
My positive for the movie is I did enjoy the animals. I thought they were really well done. The bear fight was cool when he punched his jaw out. But yeah, I don't know. This movie was not good. I'm trying to find like the silver linings because I remembered enjoying this again as a kid watching it. But yeah, I'm now realizing that my bar for movies when I was younger was very low.
I'm willing to bet the book is at least better than this, because low bar, but still.
But there is a way to stop it. A little cut.
The whole like circumcising the kids'
What?
animals away from them was really weird. Well, they called it something else, but you know, they called it an intercision.
I got really excited for one point because they said the operation made the kids grow up. And so I thought when they put Lyra in the chamber, she was going to come out an adult and we'd get a different actor. And I wouldn't have to look at her again.
It's hard to nail down exactly what's missing from this movie, but there definitely is something not quite complete about it. It just feels like there was some sort of mandate to make it as uninteresting as possible. Between this and Eragon, we have had two movies that bank very heavily on the idea that they will get a sequel and are 1,000 times funnier because they didn't. Because the ending of this movie is literally Lyra just explaining what the sequel is going to be. There's no nuance, there's no subtlety.
She's straight up just pitching it.
I want to know what dust is. Maybe we're supposed to go to that other world with my father and find out.
Yeah, everything I didn't like. I know it was better made than Eragon. I know it was like probably a fine movie if you were one of those kids who was really into like animals. But I wasn't. And so I'm not into it now. And I hated it. And I liked Eragon better.
Watching this movie feels kind of futile because a lot of it was just in one ear, out the other. And I was waiting for things to care about. I was waiting for interesting things to happen. And I waited for 2 hours and it just didn't happen. So I don't know what I'm supposed to get out of this. It seems like there were a lot of ideas in there about Lyra's character and her intelligence and how she can read the
alethiometer is what true fans call the golden compass.
Alethiometer?
And Ross is not a real fan.
I know it's called the alethiometer.
Every time they said it, immediately after they were like, or the golden compass. Because, you know.
It's very much a Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone situation.
Also known as a golden compass.
They throw a lot of terms at you, but like that's where they draw the line. They're like, audiences won't get the alethiometer.
Can you get it?
No.
Well, I feel like a crazy person, but that was kind of okay.
Yeah.
It was fine. It was just fine. It was above adequate almost good. Almost good. Very close.
This one hit a sweet spot where it was like competent enough and it was like silly enough where it was fun to watch most of the way through.
Every time I hear that Lily Collins is in something new, I know it's going to be bad. And I'm like, her agent must just hate her because Lily Collins, she's pretty. She's got nepotism on her side. There's no reason she can't be in something better than Emily in Paris. But then I watch her in any of those things and I'm like, oh, you're exactly good enough for this. I think if they cast someone better than Lily Collins, it would have added something. Though she was good enough, as usual, for this.
The story of Mortal Instruments, City of Bones is that Clary Frey is a teenage girl and she starts having visions of all these symbols and seeing things that seem impossible, and she discovers that she's actually part of this secret underground world of angels and demons and this race of demon hunters called the Shadow Hunters. And she gets thrown into this quest to find an artifact known as the Mortal Cup, which a evil Shadow Hunter is after. It's a pretty generic setup for your YA story, but the world is actually really compelling and interesting. I liked all the creatures. The biggest issue is all the incest.
Finally. Both my children together.
The tension in the books is very weird because in the first book, the tension is essentially, oh, these two want to get together, and it turns out they're siblings. And then in the second book, it's like they are kind of still into each other and trying to find other love interests and trying to deal with the fact that they are siblings. And then in the third one, it turns out that they're not siblings. But because, as we know from this whole day of experiences, franchises are not guaranteed, they have to make it very clear that they are not siblings in this movie. They make it very, very clear.
If you lie and tell them they're both your children, you'll break their hearts.
And then at the end of the movie, they still think they're siblings, but we, the audience, know it's a lie.
Keen-eyed viewers might notice that when, Valentine tells Jace, for Mortal Instruments, that he's his father, Clary comes back and he's like, this is your brother you just made out with. Don't you feel foolish? And then Clary's like, what the f***? And Jace goes, I know it's hard, but it's true. I know it's true. It's clearly true. He's right. I know it's true.
I wish it wasn't true.
And then 10 minutes later after they fight him, he's like, I don't think you're my sister. I just know it's not true. It just doesn't feel true. He says the exact opposite thing, and one day has passed at the maximum.
Look, Clary, I don't believe it. It doesn't feel like the truth, not in my heart.
I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird dynamic, and it's not fun to watch. It's just kind of uncomfortable.
If I had made this, I would have not done the incest thing in the first movie. And everyone just sees a movie about people fighting demons and go, that's fun. But I think first movie, just keep everyone who's made out, ambiguously related.
The weakest element of this movie for me was Valentine. He was a really poor villain. From what I remember, Valentine's whole thing was he was a really cunning villain. When they introduced him with all the flashbacks, he just looked sloppy, he was just injecting demon blood into himself to get more power, and he was just crazy just for the sake of being the big bad.
I love the part where Valentine reveals that Jace is actually his son by taking his ring that looks like a W, which he thinks his last name is Wayland, and then he turns the ring upside down. It's actually an M. Whoa.
Somebody told me that you like to play music.
The guy playing Jace from Mortal Instruments, the famous actor, Jamie Campbell Bower is his name, and he is just a black hole of charisma. Just nothing, just a bored-looking face the whole time. Every quip he has just falls so flat.
And you're hanging around with some dyed blonde wannabe goth weirdo?
Oh, and for the record, my hair's naturally blonde.
No chemistry with Clary. Nothing going on there. Just two people who seem bored.
Jamie Campbell, the guy, Jace from Mortal Instruments, he was okay. I got used to him. Although the angsty thing was clearly for the 14-year-old girls watching. All I can think when I see him is that he was young Grindelwald in Harry Potter.
Oh my God, he was.
Yeah, and he was engaged to the girl who played Ginny. And then they broke up, so what did he do? I'm willing to bet it was his fault.
Well, well, well. Look here. I don't remember inviting any children of the Nephilim.
Could have used more Magnus Bane. He seemed fun. He was charming, a good presence. The movie didn't lean on its strengths enough. Whenever they're just having fun with the concept of shadow hunters in New York, it's fun. But everything else is really kind of not good at all. And unfortunately, the majority of the movie is not good at all.
As a member of the audience, I felt like I wanted more of Luke and Magnus. And I feel like Magnus is the coolest character. He's the ripest character for, like, adding a flair, like a unique flair. Also, another one of my favorite moments is Jace putting the teleportation water just sort of in the middle of the room and sticking his arm through. That set up the fantastic action beat later in the film when he punches Valentine through the portal. That is filmmaking at its finest.
Where to begin? There's so much. This movie is so much, and that's my favorite thing about it, because this is one of my favorite bad movies. I think it's my favorite bad YA movie.
This is a really silly and trashy movie, and it stands apart from, I think, all the other movies that we've watched today in that it's not trying to be a serious movie. Like, it knows that it's a bad movie.
Both of you are wrong in different ways about this movie. Grant, you're wrong that it's bad. Ross, you're wrong that it's ironically good. It is unironically good.
Off.
This is a good movie.
Go to hell.
I'm genuinely shocked. You were both so harsh on this filmic experience.
Vampire Academy is the story of two vampire teenagers who... There's no good way to succinctly explain what happens in this movie. You kind of just have to experience it, because it's more like a series of narrative cul-de-sacs than it is a full story.
I'm still adjusting those. You know, it's been less than a year since we ran away from the academy. 2 years since the crash.
From the very beginning, you are just inundated with exposition and terms, so much so that they have to flash the words on screen to make sure you can keep track of them, because even the editor knows this is nonsense. There's Moroi, Strigoi, and Dampiers. The Dampiers are like half vampires, and they're trained to protect the Moroi, who are like vampires, but not really. And then there's the Strigoi, who are basically vampires.
Evil bloodsuckers that only come out at night and can only be killed by a silver stake.
When it starts, you think it's going to be about bullying and how these girls aren't accepted by their peers and how they use their vampire-specific powers to overcome that. And then it's sort of about that. And then new characters just keep popping up, and all the dialogue is so rapid fire that you can't even really have time to process what people are saying.
Jesse and I barely even made out, and Ray wasn't even there, so I don't even know what he's talking about.
Yes, teenage boys are weak and sweaty piglets. It is our covenant.
When I first start thinking about a movie after I watch it, I take a critical lens to it. I feel like this movie is not worth that that level of thought. This is just a movie that you put on and you just don't think for whatever the runtime is. You just flick your brain off and you're like, yes, there are moving images on the screen. Sometimes they're saying funny things, and sometimes they're punching each other, and sometimes they're rubbing their slit wrists on the wall. And that's what I'm seeing now.
The stuff that's good was not getting the appreciation it deserved.
Like what?
I really liked that they seemed like lesbians. That was on purpose, and I enjoyed it. I also like the uniforms. I'm trying to think of a reason that's not gay right now.
It has the same problem as a lot of these other YA movies, where it does feel like they're trying to get all the specific information about this book series into the movie so you kind of get what's unique about it. But because you're just buried underneath all this exposition, they have to cut out the things that make the plot coherent. And you're left with what feels like a series of deleted scenes to a miniseries that was never made. Vampire Academy does not feel like a singular story or a singular adaptation of a singular story, especially with what I think is the most embarrassing sequel bait ending, maybe of all of these.
There's a certain genre of movie which is like gay girls making fun of a genre with a limited budget. And there's not that many entries. This reminds me vaguely of Jennifer's Body in that it will not be appreciated by Philistines like some people here, but it's fun.
Sweet sassy molassy. I just want you to know I would never use the word sweet sassy molassy unless under the influence.
It's not a matter of amusement or discussion.
What I love about Vampire Academy is there's no one element I can point to and say like, oh, that's the worst example of this in a YA thing. But all of it together just coalesces into this beautiful gumbo of delicious trash that I just can't get enough of. If you're out there and you're not a YA aficionado like myself, and you're looking to get into the dark underbelly of these trashy adaptations, this is the bottom of the barrel, I believe. But at the same time, it's also the most fun because it's having so much fun trying to be like irreverent and cute and quirky, and it just doesn't sell that at all because it's moving so fast.
Ever wonder what happened to that friend of yours obsessed with vampire books and shows? It's called the Human Feeder Program.
The way Vampire Academy acts as an example and a sort of meta reflection on the vampire YA genre is so interesting to me. You can tell the movie wants to be the smarter take on the genre, but nothing else it presents is original or interesting in any way beyond making up weird magical powers, and that doesn't really count. It's a lot of different franchises and stories that you've seen before, done worse.
My boyfriend is Christian Azera and his parents were Strigoi. Get over it.
Just if you have a couple hours and you're really bored and you want something super silly, Vampire Academy will not disappoint. Ever.
Ross said, this is a movie you need to see. And in my humble opinion, this is a movie no one should see. So
you're wrong.
This is a movie you may want to look at for a couple hours. This is not a movie you should watch.
This was the one I was most excited to watch because it's the one I'm least familiar with overall. I read the first book years ago and I don't remember a lick of it. I expected this to be much worse than it was, and it was surprisingly pretty okay and maybe kind of good generally. So, I mean, we ended on a high note, which was not what I expected at all.
Like, I read the book as an adult again because I had to for a class because my degree was a joke. And it's like shockingly bad. The book is just, I was reading, I was shocked.
I felt that Divergent was pretty middling. Out of all of the movies we've seen today, I feel like that is the one I would most want to see in theaters, or at least I would be the happiest with leaving the theater after seeing that movie.
So Divergent is the story of a young girl named Triss who exists in a society where people take a test and they choose which faction they want to belong to, and each faction sort of represents a different aspect of human life, whether it's honesty or intelligence or bravery, and Triss turns out to be divergent, which means she doesn't fit into any specific category. She is, in the most literal terms possible, not like the other girls. In terms of premise and characters, it's very, very middle of the road generic YA stuff, but I think what really sold this for me was the direction, the way it looked, the way it felt, the way the story was handled. I think in the hands of a worse director, obviously it would have been worse, but even a different director, I think Neil Berger really killed it with this. A lot of the sequences that you encounter in this are sort of dream nightmare sequences where people are confronting their fears and learning to overcome them, and the various ways that Triss tries to deal with that. And I thought all those sequences were really fun. When she first gets into Dauntless, which is the faction she joins, which is all about bravery, and they're all soldiers and they're doing their initial training, that was all pretty fun, and I had a good time with it. There was no point in this movie where I was actually bored or even generally uninterested. I was always curious to see where it was going.
Divergent was pretty inoffensive. It did put into perspective a lot of things about watching these, because we watched 3 that were sort of targeted at what was once my demographic of teen girls. But the thing that struck me the most was that for all three of them, the love interest is an older guy who's quiet and angry and teaches them how to do hand-to-hand combat. What does this say about us as a society that we're like, this is what little girls want? And that we're right about that.
This was just solid. It was just pretty good the whole way through. The action was fun. The characters were fine. Miles Teller is the only one who really stood out in terms of having an actual personality, and Miles Teller is great at playing smarmy assholes, so it works.
I'm talking to you. Are all you stiffs deaf or something? Hey!
Divergent was a good note to end on because it felt like watching a real movie that I would have watched in the theaters. And I would have been like, there's a sequel coming out, and I would have felt sure of that. I would have wanted it, but I wouldn't have needed it and felt disappointed if I didn't get it.
I find the story of this franchise fascinating because they started with this one, they did Insurgent, and then they were going to do Allegiant Part 1 and 2, and Part 1 did so badly that they just gave up, and they were going to transition it to being a TV show, and all the actors just said, we don't want to do that. And they just kind of dropped it. And I find that so fascinating. It's this strange little footnote in all these YA adaptations because you'd think when you're 3 movies deep, you're guaranteed to at least finish things off.
Like imagine if Twilight or Harry Potter, they'd just been like, nah, Part 1 was enough.
Breaking Dawn Part 1 and just Part 2 never comes out.
It's amazing.
But this movie I was team 4. Because there was no other option. Because her cute friend who liked her killed himself. No love triangle here.
Yeah, I mean, Shailene Woodley and Theo James, they're both very bland YA leads, but they work as like blank slates you can project yourself onto. And, you know, she's quiet and meek and learns to be brave, and he's quiet and angry and learns to be vulnerable. You've seen it 100 times before, but it works. It works just fine. Everything works just fine in Divergent. After a day of watching dysfunctional, weird, out there pieces of garbage, I was happy to end the day on a note of just sort of like, that works. That was okay.
Maybe you're not quite as dauntless as you thought you were.
You're right. I'm Divergent.
So, you have to erase one of these 5 movies from existence. Which is it?
Golden Compass.
Okay, I knew you would say that. Then you can take the budget from that movie and give one of the other movies a sequel.
Ooh.
Which movie do you give a sequel?
I think...
Don't you dare.
It's got to be Vampire Academy.
Overall, at the end of the day, what I think I learned today was that I miss being like a nubile film watcher and just...
Why did you say nubile?
I don't know that nubile was the word we were looking for.
What? Isn't that a word that you
It is.
Sure is a word.
Doesn't mean quite what you think it means.
I miss being a young kid and just wide-eyed at seeing like anything fantasy or magically related happening on screen and just immediately being impressed and excited by that. I feel like I've been kind of ruined by good movies, and now I can't really enjoy these anymore the way I once did.
The one I enjoyed the most as a movie was Divergent, but my favorite is Vampire Academy.
If I had to order the movies, I would probably put Divergent at the top, City of Bones second, Golden Compass third, Vampire Diaries fourth, and Eragon fifth.
The ranking goes Vampire Academy, Divergent, Mortal Instruments, which I actually really liked. I liked 3 out of 5. Like, I actually genuinely enjoyed 3 out of 5. I would watch 3 out of 5 again. I probably will. And then bottom 2, Eragon, which I also kind of enjoyed. Although it was terrible. It was like so bad. It was so bad. And then Golden Compass, which I'll never watch again.
I think we all learned a little something today about ourselves, our childhoods, the things we used to enjoy, the things we enjoy now. And it's nice to know that I can still find some genuine enjoyment in these movies, and it's not all purely ironic or hate watching. I can say I kind of like Divergent, and I did not expect to be able to say that today. Or any day.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And you know what? If I can take away a positive, I will take it.